Okay, greetings. I cannot see anybody, so it's a bit odd, but I hope that you're all there. Thank you for coming. My name is Dr. Melissa Myambo, and I'm very happy to be here today, UJ students. Today, the title of my talk is COVID-19, Spatial Inequality is the Super Spreader. And actually, I want to pose that also as a question, not just a statement. Since this is all very recent history, I'm sure you all remember that on 11 March 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. And at the same time, when this happened, there were a lot of headlines about how this was a great equalizer, it's a great leveler, we're all equally vulnerable, and now we all remember our shared humanity, that we are all indeed just fragile human creatures. But I think that those were very disingenuous headlines and very dangerous, because this disease is not equally felt by different parts of the population. So I think that we have to be very clear that the transmission, the effects and consequences of COVID-19 and the various lockdown measures used to combat the spread of the disease are experienced most viscerally by society's most vulnerable people. I am very interested in the question of inequality, and I'll group that under the idea of income inequality. Income inequality means that people who, without medical aid, which is actually most South Africans and most people in the world do not have medical aid, to be honest, even wealthy countries like the US, there are many millions of people who do not have what they call health insurance, are obviously suffering greatly from this disease because they either do not have access to testing, or they are afraid to become sick because many of them work in precarious employment. They work in jobs like being Uber Eats delivery drivers, or they're service providers like hairdressers, or they do manicures. And if they should become ill or test positive for COVID-19, they will in fact have to lose time from work. They'll have to give up their work, they have to self-isolate for 2 weeks or wait for the disease to be over. So all these considerations mean that people who are even, who are more vulnerable or have more precarious employment conditions and cannot work from home, which is anybody without internet or anybody who has to work with their hands or anybody who has a job which requires a physical presence, are much more affected by by COVID-19 and lockdown measures. Some figures, some stats say that 60% of the world's workforce works in the informal economy. And I think that's something that we have to remember also, because even when you try to put in place government schemes to give people money to get them through COVID-19 and the effects of lockdown, oftentimes the informal sector is left out. And that means that 60% of people globally are really not being accounted for in these government schemes. So I'm sure you are all aware also that income inequalities always are entanglements, intersections, and they map onto each other. So there are many forms of inequality, and they intersect and map onto various other forms of injustice and inequity. So if I'm talking about income inequality, I have to talk about gender inequality, racial inequality, religious inequality, educational inequality. Caste, I work a lot in India, so caste inequality is a very big factor. Ethnic inequality, access to digital technology is a huge inequality, social, political, and spatial. So all these forms of interlocking inequalities impact the access an individual or a group has to effective healthcare. Those who are more privileged have an easier time weathering the social and economic impact of lockdowns. They have larger savings and accounts to cushion the effects of a long coronavirus-induced recession, which we're absolutely having now, and they have larger homes in which to shelter in place. So today, I really want to focus on the issue of space and spatial inequality, and I really mean in a very, very tangible sense, not at all metaphorical, really actual physical space, and how it relates, especially to the transmission of COVID-19. Huda, would you kindly please go to the next slide? So just for the students know, I edited this book. We wrote this book in 2017 and 2018, and it came out last year. It's a book called Reversing Urban Inequality in Johannesburg. And as you know, spatial transformation has been on the agenda in South Africa for last 26 years, and we're still nowhere close to achieving it. So we looked at, that should have also been a question, are we reversing urban inequality in Johannesburg? But publishers don't like to put question marks in titles, but it's a question. And so my interest in inequality is because I study really what we call globalization, which is in effect global capitalism, which is in effect right now neoliberal global capitalism. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, what that means and what capitalism does and how it actually sows and creates inequality. But right now, I'm going to ask Huda if she can put you into breakout rooms. And I'm going to ask you, that students, if you could just come up with your definitions of spatial inequality and also super spreader, what you understand by the expressions spatial inequality and what you understand by the expression super spreader. If you come up with definitions of those, and then if one person in the group would like to report back to all of us via speech at the end of maybe 5 minutes, however long you think it might take, we're going to come back and try to discuss these terms and at least get to grips with the definitions of these terms, and then we're going to continue from there.
Gila nominated me from us, so I suppose I'll go ahead then. So we defined spatial inequality in terms of a comparative access to resources, education, and infrastructure.
Fantastic.
I'll go for my group. We defined spatial inequality as unequal access to resources or services depending on location. And in South Africa specifically, spatial inequality exists along racial lines, which was by design.
Excellent.
I think I'll go for my group. Bradley, you want to go? We defined spatial inequality as exactly the same as the previous group. It's basically the barrier or the wall that is created by geographical situations. So we then made an example of how the rural areas do not have access to the internet, and now they will be shut off from the whole world, and how the formal settlement will go forward with the fourth industrial revolution, and the connectivity there is pretty good, and they can do work and other sort of income generating practices in their own homes, and the rural area people will not have that access, and they'll be hindered in a way. So that's some form of spatial inequality, which opens doors to other inequalities also, which is connected to the movement and space making.
Excellent. Okay, fantastic. Okay, guys, just because of lack of time, if there's another group that wants to add something that was not already covered, then just maybe add that, but otherwise we're going to move on. So just quickly, if there's something that was not covered by all of these very good definitions already given, then why don't you just jump in quickly, otherwise we're going to move on from there. Okay, are we moving on? It's wonderful. It's fantastic. You can't even see the students in this, so it's very difficult. Okay, okay. So let's just move on. Huda, would you mind please just going to the next slide, if you wouldn't mind? Okay, guys, I think that you all heard those very good definitions of spatial inequality, and since you live in South Africa, I think you must know it very visually as well. So if you look at this house here in Dainfern Estate in north of Johannesburg, this house is very deluxe. It is a luxurious villa. Now imagine if you get sick with COVID-19 in this villa, you can easily just go ahead and go into one of the thousands of rooms in the house and stay there until you feel better. And probably the other people in the house won't have to be infected by you, because you have so much space in which you can self-isolate and you can quarantine, and you will have internet there, and you will be able to watch YouTube videos all day long and finish all the Netflix series you want. So you won't be bored and depressed while you stay at home. You can even do exercises and on all the very good online exercise videos on YouTube. So you can see that your whole experience of COVID-19 in this villa will be very, very different from just down the road. So let's just move to the next slide, please. We're going to go ahead to Diepsloot, which is 7 kilometers from Dainfen. Now, one of the most important things to understand about capitalism is that, according to Karl Marx, capitalism sows both poverty and wealth simultaneously. So it's not just that people are wealthy or people are poor, it's that people become rich by making other people poor. And people are poor, which enables other people to be rich. So you see that the people who live in Diepsloot are the ones who are working in Dainfen oftentimes. And you can see that if you become sick in Diepsloot, which is an informal settlement, and I think you all know what an informal settlement is, and there are many billions of people around the world who live in informal settlements, which do not have good sanitation, which are not planned structures normally. They are ad hoc structures put up by people as they need them, because governments have failed to provide housing for people. And this is not only in South Africa, but countries around the world. So I think that we can actually move to the next slide, because one of the concepts that I work with a lot, and again, this is from Karl Marx and many many more contemporary geographers like David Harvey and Neil Smith have also used this notion of uneven development. So again, it's back to how when one thing develops, it's usually underdeveloping something else. And we can see this materially in the world through spatial inequality. So spatial inequality is when socioeconomic differences become spatialized and materialized through the remaking of urban communities. And this is a quote I'm taking from Li Zhang, a Chinese scholar. But spatial inequality is not something that is, but something that is always being made and also remade. So as some people said in their different definitions, definitely we inherited a legacy from apartheid that unfortunately in post-apartheid we have not managed to reverse or overcome at all. And in fact, that is one of the ways in which our legacy that has not been transformed is still continuing to plague us, and especially now with COVID-19, because we can see that living in an informal settlement without proper sanitation, without spacing between the dwellings, makes it much easier for COVID-19 to spread like wildfire. Huda, can you please go to the next slide, please? So just to get this point home, we have to understand that we are all living in global capitalism everywhere around the world, especially what we call neoliberal global capitalism, which is a particular phase of capitalism of the last 40 years. And in this phase, rich people have been getting richer. You've seen that Amazon, people who can work online, like the Amazon owner, Jeff Bezos, his business is booming. He is richer than ever. When most people, ordinary people under COVID-19 are suffering, the rich people are getting richer. This is because of the certain phase of capitalism we are in. And so I think that today we're going to concentrate on international uneven development, but there's also international. So between nations, there's uneven development, which is also materialized spatially, but within the nation there is. So we're going to just go to the next slide. So the next slide is just, we all live with this reality. And I've been accused before of that this is a cliche. And I get quite annoyed with that, because it's not a cliche when it's perfectly true. This is the reality in which we live, that Alex and Stanton are next to each other. And again, they are dialectically related. Dialectical means that they depend on each other for the co-creation. This is also from a Marxist concept. And Stanton's wealth also depends on Alex's poverty. So you can see again that it will be much easier to live in Stanton during a COVID-19 outbreak than to live in Alex. So I think that also if we had time, I would love to go into comparison, for example, with Brazil. Brazil and South Africa trade places constantly for the most unequal country in the world according to the Gini coefficient. And Brazil's favelas are very similar. The way favelas are like their version of townships and informal settlements. And I don't think that we can be very homogeneous here, because as anybody knows, if you go to Soweto, there are some parts of Soweto which are fantastic and beautiful and wonderful houses, and there are other parts of Soweto which are more informal settlement. So I'm not trying to just smash all those things together. The same in Brazil's favelas. Some parts of them will be more fancy houses, and some parts will be people struggling more to get running water and electricity, etc. So there's a lot of diversity within those spaces. But just because of lack of time, we're just saying, oh, informal settlements and townships. But just to be aware that, of course, we must know that there's a lot of diversity within those spaces. And it would be very great to know within those diverse spaces, actually, where the hotspots are for COVID-19 and how the actual physical infrastructures of the dwellings influence that. But anyway, because we don't have time, we're just going to talk about South Africa for right now. So I think that COVID-19, as I said, has cast a hot and bright spotlight on the various forms of inequality that made up the world prior to the outbreak of the disease. And some people suddenly discovered that as a community, we are only as safe as the most high risk amongst us. So for many people, it feels as if the world we know has collapsed. But actually, when we grapple with the fact that 1 in 6 South Africans live in a formal settlement, in inadequate housing without proper sanitation, we should understand that for a lot of people, the world had actually already was quite collapsed. And this is a problem, a political problem that we have. Around the world, spatial inequality means that almost 1 billion people live in crowded and congested shack settlements with little or no sanitation. And so that's also in other countries like India and Brazil and other such countries. So obviously, we have understood now that contracting the disease and the need for self-isolation means that you have to have a space in which to do that. And how can people without access to running water be expected to constantly wash their hands? It's the question. So we now want to come to the concept of super spreader. Now, guys, can anybody give me a quick definition of super spreader? And then we want to relate spatial inequality to super spreader. So if someone can just unmute themselves and tell me what you understand by super spreader, that'd be fantastic.
Good morning, all. I think I'll start for my group. We went for a definition that is super spreader is a racially segregated location that is densely populated, specifically with attention to the apartheid era 4-bedroom households where there is a lot of people living within them. And the reason for this was that if you've got more than 10 people living within a 4-bedroom household, social distancing in itself is actually not quite possible, therefore with the virus spreading much faster. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and sorry guys, just to make sure we get we're fair here, can people who did not speak before on spatial inequality come forward now to tell us what their definition of super spreader is? Okay, don't all shout at once.
I'll go since no one doesn't want to go. I think for us, well, we did not discuss it deeply, but a super spreader is basically like some kind of an exponential stepping of a disease or of a virus from one person to another. So let's say it goes to me, and then from me it goes to 2 people, from 2 people goes to 4 people. So it's an exponential growth, and then spatially it is enhanced by the enveloping or the walls within the people. So the super spreader is pretty significant within the people. It's different from informal settlement and formal settlement, since small spaces are a lot of people stay in small spaces in informal settlement as opposed to formal settlement. So a super spread is basically like an exponential spreading of a disease due to spatial envelope in a way.
Okay, okay, thank you. Okay, Huda, can we just go to the next slide, please? Okay, guys, so really, super spreader actually is a term that applies to people normally. During the typhoid crisis, there was a lady named Typhoid Mary who they discovered managed to spread the disease to many, many people because she was a cook and she used to go to different people's houses and cook for them. And then they discovered that she was carrying the disease and she was spreading it to many people. So it actually normally refers to a person. But because COVID-19 can be spread by people who are asymptomatic, who don't have any symptoms, and but yet can be shedding virus load, it's quite complicated to know who are the super spreading people, because some people who are spreading the disease do not even have symptoms of it. So I think it's actually, instead of also blaming people, and choosing one person saying this evil person has spread the disease to many people, because for some reason, some people only spread the disease to 1 or 2 people who maybe they live with. But some people apparently can spread the disease. They have more virus load, so they can spread it to more people. But I'm not really interested in the idea of a person. I'm more interested in the idea of super spreading events. So what's interesting is that if you think about super spreading events, and I'm really talking about events as just the ordinary events of everyday life, we have to understand that with no vaccine, all solutions to controlling coronavirus are spatial. All the solutions that we have available to us right now are spatial, meaning that we say we have to do social distancing. That's a very annoying term because it actually means physical distancing. So you actually need to have 1 to 2 meters between you and another person, because you could be carrying coronavirus, they could be carrying coronavirus. So you have to have space to have that distance, first of all. Then you have to be able to self-isolate or quarantine. And that requires you to have private and self-sufficient spaces in which to do so. Obviously, we know in many informal settlements, there are not indoor flush toilets. People are sharing ablution blocks. Many people are cooking outside and cooking again near other people because there's just not adequate space. So just think about all the spatial requirements it really takes to do self-isolation or quarantine. Lockdowns are supposed to break the transmission chains by keeping people separate. But again, as we've already discussed, some people are living 10 people in a 4-bedroom house. So how can you keep people separate then? And not only that, their neighbors are also very close together to them. So we're going to actually come into some very granular research being done in South Africa on informal settlements that really makes this point. So exactly, we talked about density. The density of a given area determines the number of people who a virus shedding person can infect. So if I'm staying in Sandton in my big mansion there, and then in the next door mansion there's someone with COVID, I probably won't get it from them because I'm in my mansion, I'm surrounded by my mansion, and I've got plenty of space, right? But if I'm staying in Alex and my neighbor is I'm coming outside to cook, and then she's also cooking there, it's much easier for the disease to spread. And I know these are very basic things, but for some reason, people do not think about them or talk about them enough. And even our own government did not think about these issues enough with lockdown. So can we go to the next slide, please, Sudan? So I'm saying when the event of everyday life is overdetermined by uneven infrastructures and architectural realities that make social distancing and effective hygiene impossible, spatial inequality becomes a super spreader. And so I think that this is an opportunity to really think about whether we can conquer this disease in South Africa if we cannot overcome spatial inequality. And then just think about, do we have the political will to be able to do that? Because places where people are densely packed and engaging in anything, even from talking, means that the disease can spread. So I think right now, because I know you have another speaker coming, I think we must just go to the next slide, please. I want to show you this. This is current research in South Africa. And what they're talking about here is, this is an informal settlement in Cape Town. And I put the reference there. This is Gibson and Rush. And this paper is available online. And this is just one of the one of the images that they have there that are very impactful, because what they're saying here is that they used geographical information systems to actually map the spaces between different dwellings in this informal settlement, in one of the informal settlements in Cape Town that they looked at. And what they're saying here is that because the dwellings are so close together, they are less than 2 meters apart, it's impossible for people on the household level to actually self-isolate and quarantine. So the different colors represent the clusters of households that could maybe quarantine as a community, on a community level, but that they're saying that look how close these houses are together. How can you actually impose a lockdown where everybody has to stay in their house? And I'm sure you saw the very disturbing images, and we all know Collins Khoza and the other cases that happened under lockdown, where we have military policing the streets, telling people to go back home. But as you said, if people are staying 10 people in a one-room shack, which is what one guy in Alex even told some news broadcasters, he was staying with 6 people in a one-room shack dwelling. How is it he's going to stay there all day long? Is it not safer to be outside? It's a question. But we have this idea that everybody must quarantine and lock down in their household. But actually, it becomes impossible spatially because there's just not enough distance between. So we can actually move to the next map as well. In this map, we can see that there are, this is a map produced by, what are they called? The Gauteng something, City Region Observatory. They have a very good map here. And this map is talking about looking at Gauteng province by ward and saying, where are the high risk areas? And they have actually, I've got to find where I wrote this down now. They have identified 6 ways in which wards become riskier. Let's see if I can find it where I wrote it down. And really, it's important to know that, again, these are all because of spatial factors. So the risk factors that they used in preparing this map included crowded living conditions. So the darker the color on the map, the more risky the area is. So the risk factors that they used to make this map include 6 factors: crowded living conditions, the sharing of water and toilet facilities, dependence on public healthcare facilities, limited access to communication tools, and reliance on public transport. So this just shows you how spatially unequal Johannesburg is, because look at that and look at how many dark areas there are, and darker. So I just want to end this by saying that we can just go to the next slide. This is the final slide. That, you know, we're living in a situation in a context of global capitalism, which creates uneven development, meaning that we are having poverty and wealth simultaneously produced. And that in itself materializes in spatial inequality. So for the majority of the world population, really, and definitely in South Africa, we have to say the majority of the population, in the event of their everyday life, in the events of their everyday life, they are experiencing COVID-19 at the super spreader level, meaning that they cannot isolate themselves from others with any ease. And we've discussed some of those reasons, because if you have to work and you have to see people to work, then you're going to be exposed. If your living conditions are such that you have to go to a water stand to get water every day, there'll be other people there. I mean, who can live without water? Nobody. So I think we have to ask if reducing spatial inequality could possibly decrease transmission rates, and also how we would actually manage to achieve that, considering that for 26 years we've had spatial transformation on the agenda and we have not yet done it. But maybe this is our chance, because we can see that if we live like this, we are automatically making ourselves very vulnerable to any future disease.